Last week we continued the prelude of our Eastern Front of World War II week-by-week series with an episode on the Weimar Republic and the German army in the 1920s, tracking its development as its leaders began reckoning with the imperial military's failures in the First World War. Additionally, we looked at the growing unrest in the fledgling democracy and the failure to contain the threat of fascism. This week we move to the 1930s and will focus on the end of the democratic government in Germany, the transformation of the Reichswehr into the Wehrmacht, and the pivotal moments in the lead-up to the Second World War breaking out in Europe. We will leave the start of the war to another video in this series, but for now let's begin. This series dives deep into complex and often sensitive historical topics that may not always align with YouTube's guidelines, so your support is essential. By becoming a member or patron, you're helping keep this project alive and ensuring we can continue delivering high-quality content to our viewers without worrying about demonetization. Our members and patrons have early access to the next 6 episodes. Become one by pressing the join button under the video or via the links in the description and pinned comment, and gain access to future Eastern Front videos and 200 other exclusive episodes. At the beginning of the 1930s, supporters of the Weimar Republic could justifiably look back on the 20s with some pride. The state had survived against crushing odds and beat back revolutionaries, putschists, and military coup attempts. There was more trouble on the horizon, though. The government was in desperate financial straits. There was a burgeoning economic depression emanating across the Atlantic from the United States, which had been a guarantor of Germany's economic stability throughout the 1920s. As a result of this depression, currency devaluation became rampant, contributing to the ruin of the German trade balance. When combined with a wave of bankruptcies and a declining standard of living, this made for a grim outlook. Worse yet, the extreme right parties were to see massive gains in the national elections of September 1930. The Nazis became the second largest party in the country overnight. They seized this opportunity to demand a voice in the national government. Heinrich Brüning, as the Chancellor, tried to negotiate a compromise coalition without giving the Nazis any actual power in the government. Hitler responded by having his SA thugs ramp up street violence across the country, while he started to campaign for the 1932 presidential election. This two-pronged effort netted him second place overall with 36% of the popular vote, with 53% of the vote going to Paul von Hindenburg, a field marshal during the First World War. The Reichstag elections of that summer made the Nazis the largest party in the nation in votes and seats. More political maneuvering only delayed the inevitable, and by January of 1923, Hitler was named Chancellor. In February, an arsonist set a fire that gutted the Reichstag building. Hitler used this opening to secure emergency decrees from Hindenburg and a parliamentary grant of extraordinary powers to his office. By August of the next year, Hitler was in full control of the country. He had outlawed all other political parties, conducted a purge of his own party and opposition elements, and acquired the uncompromising support of the army and the country's industry leaders. Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August 1934. The old field marshal and president of the Republic was the last obstacle to Hitler's complete dictatorship. The day Hindenburg died, Hitler had every soldier and civil servant in the country swear an oath of personal loyalty to himself. The evening before this, the law concerning the head of state of the German Reich was passed by cabinet decree that combined the offices of the President and Chancellor and granted it to Hitler. There were no more legal obstacles to his totalitarian rule of the country. Hitler set out from the beginning to remake the country into a great power. He would achieve this through military rearmament, disregarding the post-war treaties, and the Nazification of civilian society. The rearmament had been started under earlier governments, but the Nazi ideology conceived of the military as a tool of aggression to rebuild national greatness. To this end, the military needed to be rebuilt into an offensive war machine. Hitler started this process almost immediately with the support of industry and military leaders. The ongoing rearmament efforts were ramped up, but this was initially still kept under some veil of secrecy. The attempts to conceal the rearmament were poorly done, and soon it was an open secret that the German army was rebuilding in violation of the Treaty of Versailles. There was no will in any of the guarantor nations to step in at this time, something that would become a running theme for the rest of the decade. In 1935, Hitler announced the creation of the Luftwaffe, with Hermann Göring at its head. This was the boldest violation of Versailles yet, and he followed it up with a speech repudiating the treaty entirely. Germany was now in open defiance of the post-war world order. Tanks and planes of all types were now being built in large numbers to match the naval construction that had started before the Nazis took power. The next step was the formation of a new combined military command. This was the new Wehrmacht. The General Staff was refounded and transformed into the Oberkommando der Heer, or OKH. The Navy was given a new name and a command staff to match. The newly minted Kriegsmarine would be under Oberkommando der Marine, OKM. The Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, OKL, would be the planning and command heart of the new Air Force. These staff systems were then subjugated in 1938 to the control of an overall military command and control staff, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or OKW. This new system was welcomed by most of the military's senior officers, with some exceptions. Many recognized almost immediately the potential for abuse and rivalries to form under the army-dominated system. Several officers in the OKH felt that their traditional role as the planners of the nation's wars and military operations was in danger of usurpation by the OKW. The SS had been actively growing during these years as well. They had started as merely Hitler's guards, but would soon become a nearly unrivaled political force inside of the state, with secret police powers. Alongside this growth in political power was a growth in the physical size of the force. In the later years of this decade, the core of the SS grew to become a regular infantry regiment, though outside of the normal chains of command of the army. The Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler was initially a lifeguard of sorts, but would eventually form the foundation of the Waffen-SS, growing to a panzer division and in the last years of the war a panzer corps. With his stranglehold on political power inside of Germany consolidated and his military making significant progress in its rearmament, Hitler turned his attention to the territorial goals of the new government. The first of these was designed to demonstrate the apathy of the former Allied powers. On March 7, 1936, a token force of just a few battalions of German infantry paraded into the cities in the demilitarized zone along the Rhine River. The French panicked internally, consulted with the British, and found that there was no will to muster resistance to this move. Within days, it was decided to allow this flagrant violation to stand. Hitler was encouraged by the display of weakness on the part of the French and British governments. He bided his time strengthening his forces until early 1938. At this point, it was decided that Austria should be united into the so-called Third Reich, fulfilling a long-held tenet of Nazi propaganda to unite the German-speaking people in one nation. OKH was directed to draw up plans to move the army across the border and secure key objectives in Austria. Meanwhile, Hitler worked to engineer the political takeover of the country. In March of that year, the Austrian government, browbeaten by Hitler, called for a referendum on the issue of unification with Germany. Knowing the referendum could not go in Germany's favor if allowed to progress freely, Hitler sent his troops across the border in the name of securing peace. There was no resistance by the Austrian army, in part thanks to advanced infiltration by Nazi sympathizers. The Austrian government was denied any hope of assistance from the United Kingdom or the French. The Italians had previously opposed the Anschluss, but Mussolini had been disheartened by the lack of defiance by the Western Allies. Additionally, he was isolated by his imperial adventures in Ethiopia, which resulted in Italy being sanctioned by the League of Nations. This left him vulnerable to Hitler's alternative promises and threats, which ended with Mussolini taking Italy into a pseudo-client state relationship under the Germans. The relationship was solidified with the Berlin-Rome Axis Treaty in 1937, which gave its name to the alliance that would fight in the Second World War as the aggressors. With Mussolini disarmed and the Western Allies unwilling to defend Austria's independence, it was left to the voters of Austria. After weeks of intimidation by soldiers and Nazi brutes, the referendum was sufficiently rigged to be allowed to go through. On April 10th, voting was held, and the announced result was 99.7% voting in favor of unification. Austria was now officially recognized as part of Germany. The Republic of Czechoslovakia was created from the ashes of the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the end of the First World War, as part of American President Wilson's call for self-determination. It was ethnically varied, with people who called themselves German, Czech, Slovakian, Hungarian, and Ruthenian among the population. Nazi attention had been drawn to the Republic for years. Czechoslovakia was seen as a threat to the national security of Germany, allied as it was to France and the USSR. In 1937, Hitler started to make noises about protecting the German-speaking people in a region of the country known as the Sudetenland. About 98% of people here self-identified as German, and the Nazi state was eager to use this to their advantage. Pressure was put on the young republic to make concessions to the Nazis concerning the region. The French and British were eager to ensure that nothing could stand in the way of peace, and cooperated with Hitler to put pressure on the Czechoslovakian government. In the summer of 1938, Hitler made clear that he wanted the entire region annexed by Germany. There was much confusion among the Allies, as competing factions inside the respective governments made the case for peace at all costs versus defending the Central European country from what was clearly seen as insatiable German aggression. The French army was supposed to be the strongest in the world, and the rest of Europe looked to them to lead the military response. As in the situation with the Rhineland and then Austria, French generals, led by General Maurice Gamelin, wavered. The French General Staff refused opportunities for staff talks or serious military cooperation with the Czechoslovakian military. Gamelin found himself unable to take the initiative to even work out basic operational details with their other continental allies, the USSR, Poland and Romania. Under Gamelin's estimation, the military situation was not ideal. He wildly overestimated German military strength, leading to serious deficiencies in war planning. Whether this was due to incompetence or willful obfuscation to avoid the strain of war is unknown. It was true that the United Kingdom would be able only to provide a token force of 2 infantry divisions, 120 planes, and the possibility of a deep blockade by the Royal Navy. The French mustered 100 quality divisions, the Czechoslovakians 35. The USSR was in the midst of the Great Purge, and their exact capabilities and plans are difficult to discern. A year later, when they invaded Poland, the Red Army brought 34 infantry and cavalry divisions and 17 tank brigades. Presumably they would have brought a similar or even greater force to bear to support Czechoslovakia in 1938. The Polish army could have mustered somewhere in the range of 30 divisions for a war with Germany. To counter all of this, the German army possessed a mere 51 divisions. Only 2 of them were fully equipped panzer divisions, with the majority of their tanks being the all but obsolete Panzer I and II. This amounted to somewhere in the range of 500 tanks, with less than 100 of the more modern designs, the Panzer III and IV. The Czechoslovakian army was equipped with the superior LT-VZ-38. The French fielded several excellent models alongside some older designs. The cutting edge of French armour at this time was the S-35 medium tank. There were approximately 200 of these in frontline service at the time of the Sudetenland crisis, with hundreds more of the other types. The Red Army fielded a wide variety of tanks, none of which were exceptionally combat effective, as the best designs of this era were not yet fully developed. Besides the numerical and technical superiority of the various armies facing off with the Wehrmacht, the Czechoslovakian border areas were extremely well fortified. And yet, none of these nations seemed to be able to comprehend the totality of their superiority. This contributed to the fatal lack of willpower in the political elements that negotiated the appeasement of Hitler. The leaders of the Wehrmacht were aware of these deficiencies in their forces. They knew just as well the strategic hopelessness of fighting a two-front war while under the impenetrable blockade the Royal Navy could be expected to establish. They saw that the Sudetenland crisis was shaping up to be the exact sort of rallying cry that Belgium had been in 1914. Czechoslovakia might not be able to hold the German army back on its own, but it was rapidly appearing that she would not have to. This was cause for concern among the leaders of the army. Every one of them agreed with Hitler's ends, but they felt that he was being reckless in his greed to remake the political map of Europe so quickly. This recklessness risked the reunification of the old alliance that had humbled Germany so harshly just 20 years before. This knowledge led more than a few of them to form a plot to unseat Hitler, known as the Oster conspiracy. The leading members of this group decided that, first and foremost, they would not act unless Hitler actually plunged the country into a world war. Though started by a lieutenant colonel and a major, it would soon involve the highest levels of the Wehrmacht's leadership. The commander-in-chief of the army, General Brauchitsch, joined alongside his current and former chiefs of staff, Generals Hallder and Beck. The commander of the vital Siegfried Line, General Adam, supported the would-be coup. Additionally, several military district commanders threw in with the plotters: General List in Dresden, General Kluge in Münster, and General Witzleben in Berlin. The plotters also enlisted the support of the head of the Berlin police, Chief Helldorf, and the head of the Wehrmacht intelligence service, the Abwehr, Admiral Canaris. The British were made aware of the conspiracy, but evidently Chamberlain was not convinced of their seriousness. The French were not allowed to learn of it. On October 1st, Hitler moved his armies across the border into the Sudetenland. The Czechoslovakians had backed down just hours before, after learning that the British and French would no longer honor their pact to go to war with Germany if Hitler violated Czechoslovakian territory. The USSR, while still interested in defending them, could not provide any meaningful aid as long as the Poles and Romanians refused them access to their territory. This was how the young republic fell prey to Hitler's ambition. The Oster conspirators backed down from their plans as soon as it was clear that there would be no world war. Hitler had managed to bluff the entire world into allowing him to take the Sudetenland, paving the way for him to dismember the rump state within months. Though he had promised Chamberlain that the Sudetenland was the last of his territorial demands in Europe, he was not done yet. This concludes our discussion for this week. Next week we'll track the Red Army's development and modernization through the 1930s. We will also examine the impact of the purges in the lead-up to the Second World War. Stay tuned, and remember, this is just the prelude to our weekly Eastern Front of World War II series. You won't want to miss it, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see the next video in the series. Please consider liking, subscribing, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Recently, we have started releasing weekly Patreon and YouTube member-exclusive content. Consider joining their ranks via the link in the description or button under the video to watch these weekly videos, learn about our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our private Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.